So, as I have spoken about the issue of this modern crisis, partially the crisis around illness, but also the even larger crises, war, which could be terminal, meaning end at least human civilization, maybe human beings. The climate crisis, threatening billions of people. Various new technologies that give very few people enormous power, or perhaps no one power, and the technologies themselves have the power. We may make technologies that control our minds better than we can, which arguably has already happened. Our views, for example, are technologies that seem to control us better than we can. As I've discussed this modern crisis, some people have contacted me and asked me to give more relevant talks. They've said, you might not realize this. I know that you're shut away in your monastery, but some of us are really under stress right now. We have a lot of emotional stress and also financial stress. We don't know how we're going to live because we don't know how we're going to make enough money. And so I was asked to respond to this point, to the very real suffering that many people are going through right now. And I want to begin by saying that actually I do understand that, partially because I speak to a lot of people, but also because I am a person. I have the sense that there's a general belief that when I was in elementary school, I had teachers, and even in high school, I had teachers. I just assumed that when school ended, they kind of vanished and then just re-emerged at the beginning of the school day. I didn't realize that they were people who had lives. I just thought that they were a fixture in the classroom, kind of like the desks or the chalkboard. And I have the sense that there's a belief that I am shut away in a monastery where food magically arises on the table, or we don't even exist at all except when giving talks. But actually it's not true. I have real pressure. I have to care for myself as the world is struck in panic. As the whole world coagulates around a certain perspective based on fear, based on confused senses of responsibility. And so I have to care for myself, that I'm not struck by that suffering, and that's difficult. Because at a time of stress, we often lash out, and so people have gotten angry at me. And I have to take care of myself. But beyond that, I have to care for other people. I have to care for hundreds of people, actually, in this community. Very busy. And it's not always easy to know how to do that. And then beyond that, I have financial and emotional, psychological, spiritual responsibility for dozens of people living here. I, through this situation, still have to do fundraising. As the economy falters, it's difficult to maintain this. It's difficult to maintain an opportunity for people to live with the goal of actually solving these problems. It's strange how at a time like this, more and more people want to come to a place of training like this. The world stops looking so good. And it's also harder to maintain it. So I have those stresses, which might not be well known, but nonetheless exist. And so it's important that we start here. We start at this level of ourselves. That has to be validated, that we can actually worry about ourselves. And from the perspective of ourselves, well, things are difficult. There's this general fear. And the thing that I find most frightening about this fear is that so many people I talk to are just getting used to it. This is what people do. We acclimate to things. And we're getting used to fear as the unifying principle of humanity. We're getting used to this constant tension. Constantly looking out for something. But the problem is you don't really get used to it. Your body is still impacted by it. It's still unhealthy. And it still subtly impacts the way we see the world and therefore how we live in it. We watch it, make it so that we stop behaving in rational ways, and we can get used to acting in irrational ways, but they're still irrational. We're still not acting in a reasonable way, and so negative consequences result. But beyond this, and I think most significantly in this whole tumult, most significantly, people are lonely. And we can think we're getting used to it. We can think it's okay. But it still has its impacts. We can say, well, different people are different. These children are going to be raised, they're going to go through this time period when they're not allowed to play with anybody or even really allowed outside. They're going to be lonely from friends, lonely from nature. But they'll just get used to it. They'll adjust and they'll be fine. Well, I don't really agree with that. We can say that teenagers are accustomed to connecting through screens. That's how they do it. That's how they maintain friendships. It's not a big deal. But I don't agree with that. Just because we're used to something doesn't make it healthy. You can say, well, this baby is born and they have to go. First few weeks or months without any human contact. Well, that baby gets used to it. You could say they get used to it, but they're also traumatized for the rest of their lives. You can say that, well, they worked through it, but that's still something they had to work through. But despite all of this, I have to say that of all of the people I'm worried about, and I'm very worried about children and teenagers and babies and adults, such as myself and the people who have asked me to speak on this matter, respond to the fact that people are really under stress right now. Nonetheless, the population I'm most worried about is the elderly. The elderly are already lonely, and now their families aren't allowed to see them. Going to die that way? One person I know who has passed away of this illness had to die without being allowed to see his 2 daughters. This is the situation that we've created. And beyond that, people who don't have the virus are becoming more and more lonely, more and more distant, which is extremely dangerous for people, especially the elderly. Vastly increases the likelihood of suicide. And it causes a deeply wounded, a weakened immune system. Loneliness increases one's risk of death, depending on the study, by 30 to 45%. This is extremely high. This is the same if we only think about physical health. Being lonely, in my view, a conservative estimate of how dangerous it is for one's health. As I say, it's a conservative estimate in my view, but this is accepted as a reasonable measurement. To be lonely is as bad for your physical health as to smoke 16 cigarettes a day. We see the same increase in health problems and in risk of death, which in this case can be measured by how early one dies, how much life is lost, how soon it is that a person is expected to die. Being lonely is as damaging as smoking 16 cigarettes a day. This is horrifying. This is a true stress that's on people, and people don't even know it. And strangely, we want to interact with people so much that we don't know how. We're under stress, but we want to connect with people, and so the way we connect is by getting angry, getting frustrated, getting mad at a lot of people. But this is hurtful as well. And it's just one of the reasons, of course there are many, but it's just one of the reasons that I'm concerned that our reaction to this crisis, to this coronavirus, is going to cause more death than the coronavirus would have caused if we had done nothing. And sadly, this is very common for human beings. We measure things so carefully. We live in a world of measurement. Our minds measure things. We believe in measurements. And we can measure how many people die of coronavirus, and so we base enormous decisions on that without being able to make decisions based on more subtle things like dying of loneliness. How many people die of loneliness? That's not so easy to assess, to measure. You can do it with large numbers of people. You can say these people are lonely and on average they die in this way, but you can't say this person died of loneliness in the same way you can say this person died of the coronavirus. In fact, you can't even really measure whether they died of the coronavirus because many of the people, arguably most of the people who die of coronavirus would have died soon, perhaps within a year, in any case. They had that as an added condition. But it's not so easy to measure. And you talk about the straw that breaks the camel's back. You put a lot of bricks on a camel or a horse, and you put something small on, and at that point they collapse. Well, is it because of that small thing, that straw, that one more piece of baggage? Things turn out to be more complicated than our simplistic measurements understand. And so how do we judge? How do we understand? What is the way out of all of this fear and stress and difficulty so that we can understand the problem better and stop creating larger problems? Well, there is an opportunity here. It's a difficult opportunity, but it's what I have to offer. Given who I am and what I know, this is what I have to offer. And beyond that, I can tell you that beyond who I am and what I know, this is the supreme offering. The way to work through this individual difficulty is to face death. To truly face death, which is hard, it's a struggle, and we already have a lot of stress, but the good news is that if we face that stress for a short time, it will resolve the other forms of stress for a long time. That's the good news. And so I know it's a little bit difficult, but we have this practice so that we can truly face death. And when we face death, this whole problem looks different. One of the most important things that happens as we face our death is that our perspective broadens. And if we move from the perspective of ourselves, which of course matters, if we move from the perspective of ourselves to the perspective of humanity, then we see that here are problems as well. And we can extend our compassion to these problems. We can extend our service to humanity as a whole. Because what we see now in humanity is that there's an increased acceptance and even demand for top-down control. We want the powers that be, the market, the state, companies, government, to control us. We don't trust ourselves, so we want others to take control of us. We don't trust ourselves, so we want others to take control of others. You think, well, I'm not trustworthy, so they're not trustworthy, so we all have to be controlled. But the problem is we don't trust anyone, so we don't even trust the people who are in control. And this sense of distrust is terribly wearing on us. I would say that this trust crisis is the largest crisis. The lack of trustworthiness, the lack of trustfulness, the lack of legitimate trust is the greatest crisis on earth. What is it to be trustworthy? How do we skillfully trust? These are skills that are hard to develop, but good news, it can be developed. This can be developed. One part of it, of course, is the ability to face death. Facing death is an excellent way to move forward being trustworthy. Sadly, we don't believe that the cultivation of mind is possible. Most of us don't believe that the true cultivation of mind, so that we truly become trustworthy, we don't think it can really be done. Maybe it just isn't feasible. And so the only other option is to imprison everyone, to disempower everyone. If we're not trustworthy, then the only correct thing to do is to disempower us. If we don't believe that liberation is possible, that true liberation is possible, not just that we're free to do what we want. That's not liberation. Being free to do what we want is just slavery to what we want. That is not liberation at all. People being allowed to do what they want is not what we're talking about here. We mean liberation. Beyond want, beyond understanding, beyond identity. If that is possible, then it's the only way forward. And good news, it's possible. But if it's not possible, it is possible, but we'll just say for the sake of argument, if it's not possible, then the correct thing to do is to disempower everyone, including ourselves. And that's the solution that we've taken here. And one of the most effective ways to disempower people is to limit their views, to take control of their minds and make sure that they think in a highly controlled way. One of the most amazing things to me at this time in history, each time in history has its own interesting qualities. In this time, I would say that never before, well, this has been a long trend for thousands of years actually, certainly centuries, but never before has there been so much communication. Never before has there been so much transfer of information and understanding. We never had this kind of communication before. It's incredible how much communication there is. If you consider 1,000 years ago, well, there was a postal system that worked a little bit. There was a little bit of communication through trade, mostly across Eurasia, but of course, to a great extent elsewhere in the world. There was some communication, but not like now. The amount that we talk to each other, we receive information from each other now, is facilitated by forms of technology that far surpass anything that's come before. And at the same time, never before have there been so few active ways of looking at things. Never before has our view set been so narrow. If you go back in time and look at even recent history, in the past few hundred years, different cultures looked at things in completely different ways. There were very different approaches to how to see the world and how to live life. But now it's been narrowed down to a certain form of economy, a certain form of government. Everyone's sharing it. There are very few societies, civilizations, cultures, nations that do it differently, and they're considered rogue states. And now we have a situation where virtually every community, country on Earth is responding to this coronavirus in exactly the same way. It's because we're sharing views that we're so effective. The world is becoming more and more, certain forms of activity are becoming more and more powerful, and which ones? It's the ones that can make people share views. We work together effectively because we share views together. We look at things in the same way, and so we behave in cooperative ways. So we need views that everyone can share. And what is a view that we can share? It's very interesting. It's difficult for us to share the view that there's a climate crisis. That's confusing. It's hard to understand that. But the view, you should be afraid of getting sick. Well, this one we have stamped in our bodies for millennia longer. This is very clear to us. We should be afraid of getting sick. We've had pandemic after pandemic. A lot of people died. We were afraid for a long time. And we had the sense that, well, in modern times, no one should get sick. And actually, no one should die. We've been afraid of death, sickness, aging for a long time. So we can share that fear and that view. Sickness is bad. And then we can cooperate in that way. So we have this sense of fear, and this fear doesn't exist for no reason. There have been past pandemics. Beyond that, and I think in our subconscious, far more significantly, we know that this is true. We just don't know how to feel that it's true. We don't know how to understand it. But individuals have a lot of power right now. More and more weapons become available. Terrible weapons become available to more people. Bioengineering, bioweapons are becoming more and more available. It won't be too long before there's an enormous power of destruction in everyone's hands. And of course, we're afraid of that. And we have the sense, well, then people have to be controlled. Those people aren't trustworthy. But we need a way to cooperate beyond this view, this fear-based view. Because the fear has power over us. In just the same way the fear gives us power. It gives us power because we're the ones demanding that agencies of different types, governments, companies, take control over us. Please control us. We're afraid, so we demand it. We can't just blame. We're demanding this. But at the same time, it's because we're afraid that those very same and other agencies, agents, entities, have power over us. The fear gives others power over us, and our fear also is what enables us to control others, have power over others, demand that they do things. But however that's happening, since it's happening in the context of fear, the fear is the thing that actually has the power. It's fear in our own bodies, fear in other people's bodies, collective fear, but it is the thing that has the power. And when our bodies feel this fear, our minds explain it away. Explain away why we're afraid and what should be done about it, based on those feelings. That's why now, unlike with the climate crisis, we're listening to scientists. Climate crisis, we couldn't successfully all share fear. We didn't have power. Now we're sharing fear. We have power and our minds want an explanation for what to do about it, so we listen to scientists. Because we have this basic fear drilled into our bodies for a long time. We need a way to find wisdom that isn't merely based on the human ability to explain things and on human feelings that have been stored up in our bodies for a long time. There has to be a kind of wisdom beyond that. And this path gives us that wisdom. This path, when practicing community, gives us the ability to cooperate beyond fear-based views. Which is very important, because while yes, it's true that fear helps us to survive, it does, the problem is that what survives is suffering. And beyond that, the goal isn't survival. The ultimate goal isn't survival. We're not going to succeed at that goal. The goal is freedom. And so by facing death, by taking this opportunity to face death, we work through that fear. We don't just ignore it. We don't just pretend about it. We don't just make up stories about it. We actually face it so that we can resolve that problem and find freedom. Freedom from the fear of death, freedom from death. It's been hard for us to do this because we had the sense that we didn't need to. We had the sense that the world, these entities, will keep us safe. I was talking to someone about this. She was saying, well, we have to demand that they keep us safe. They keep us safe. It's actually a fascinating sentence. They is who? Perhaps the government, perhaps companies. They need to keep us, whoever that is, me, helpless individual, safe from something, maybe a virus, or maybe a terrorist, or maybe death. So we demand that they keep us safe. They take control over all of us to prevent us from doing bad things or being the victims of bad things. The issue is that we have to see that this world has not kept us safe. Because it's living based on views, based on fear, it will not keep us safe. We're seeing it now in obvious forms. The stock market collapses and people say, I lost so much money. Jobs are lost. We don't know how we're going to make money so that we can keep our apartment, pay for food, take care of our families. So we see that, and because of that, people, very intelligently, are interested in coming here. They see that the world wasn't keeping us all that safe. It's interesting, when times aren't so good in history, more people accept that the world hasn't kept us safe. So they change how they live and they get enlightened. It's interesting, the times when we think things aren't that good in history, actually, maybe those are the best times in history. Maybe a lot of the work we've done over the centuries wasn't getting us very far. Because the ultimate goal of life isn't to be comfortable. It's to break through ignorance, to let go of attachment. To actually be safe, to achieve true security from bondage, to be secure in a way that nothing can damage. Beyond that, the world more and more has been causing terrible crises. It's supposed to keep us safe, but it hasn't been. The crises, the possibility of collapse is very high. On the largest of scales, we are not safe. We're the least safe we have ever been in human history. We are the least safe. The world has not been keeping us safe. We've demanded, keep us safe. It hasn't. It's trying more and more control, but can we trust that which is in control? Which is to say, not those people who are in control of me, and not that I, because I'm so afraid I'm controlling those people. The views based on fear are in control. And we have to ask, is it possible that a species held together by those views is going to have a collective intelligence that is going to keep anything safe? On the largest of scales, we're not safe. And on the smallest of scales, we see as we demand more and more safety, depression rises, anxiety rises, loneliness rises, suicide rises. We're in a terrible place now. More and more we want to medicate people. More and more medication so that they stop feeling what they're feeling. Is this safe? And yet, incredibly, it's by facing this, facing the fact that the world hasn't kept us safe, that we discover a way to live that brings us to true safety. And this is a complete revolution. To decide to live in such a way that brings us to true safety. This is just what a monastery is. That's all. Or an ashram or whatever you'll call it. Some place of spiritual practice. All that means is that we decide to live in such a way that we realize true safety, true security, true freedom. That's all it means. We're going to live in that way as a community together. And for centuries, millennia, people have done that and succeeded. All that time, the world churning along, damaging nature, giving a false sense of security. All of those people still died. Many, many species dying. The earth experiencing enormous destruction of life. Whereas the people who found true safety didn't participate in that nearly as much. And in fact, helped in many cases to pull society away from that direction. There are communities, this is just one of them, where people find true safety. In just the same way that on an individual level we overcome this fear of death by facing death, we overcome our fear of the world by facing the fact that the world needs to be formed in a new way in order to keep us safe. And so when we go from the sense of self to the sense of humanity, and we see that in the sense of self, yes, it's very difficult. But we can deal with it by facing death with a spiritual practice. On the level of humanity, yes, things are very difficult. And yet, we can do something about it by creating communities, a collective intelligence, a culture, based on cooperation, based on love, rather than based on fear and views. That is possible. That can be done. And at a time like this, we actually have an incredible opportunity to change how we live, to see this has not been working. Again and again, we are asked to have the wake-up call that, wow, avoiding facing death is the same thing as avoiding facing life. I don't want to do it anymore. I'm going to face it. And then we face it, and countless problems are resolved right there. In the same way, we realize the way we've been living hasn't worked. We need to make a new way of living, a new way of forming a society, a new way of cooperating. That's difficult, but I'm in. Let's do it. That can be done. And when we do it in that way, then we can offer new kinds of cooperation so that we can actually develop people's minds so that people become more trustworthy. That's the goal. We create a system of community, of governance, of connection, of communication, of collaboration that makes people more trustworthy. Because that is what the world truly needs. We can say, well, you bad people need to be controlled, but who's controlling those people? We discover that which can control us, tame us, teach us, guide us skillfully so that we actually find safety. This has been done. We're doing it here. It's a real solution. This isn't a talk like so many I've heard recently where people say this is bad and this is bad and this is bad, but there's no solution. This is the solution. It's a real, feasible solution. Each of us can face death, period. You can't say you can't. Not all of us, but some of us, the lucky ones, can move into a community where we can actually create a new society. If we're the lucky ones, we should do it. Because what is needed now is a form of power that isn't based on the cooperation, based on views, based on fear. That has been achieved. That is being achieved. We can do it. And one aspect of doing that is breaking free of this constant identification with being human. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm just going to say it because I've been wanting to say this for decades. The sense that you're human is delusional. That's just delusion. I don't know what to tell you. I feel so glad that maybe I can say it now. Someone will hear me. And I say it because if you expand beyond yourself to humanity, but then expand further to all of nature, then you see that nature is doing pretty good right now. The past few months have been awfully good for nature, for life on Earth. And it's good to see that. There's this fox who I like very much. I think her around. I'm not going to tell you where. I want to keep her safe from humans, but she seems to be quite happy right now. She's just loping around, catching some food, bringing it back to the den. No people to bother her. There are birds everywhere, birds you can hear now. Cities that have been shut down. The oceans are getting a little bit of a break in so many ways. There's a little bit less carbon, at least there's a short respite from all this carbon we're constantly emitting. We're still emitting too much of it, but in any case, a little bit, and so the oceans are doing a bit better. Global warming is slowing a little bit. There's much less sound pollution in the ocean. Maybe you all know these ships are constantly churning, and they put so much sound into the ocean that whales can't communicate with each other. Whales are accustomed to being able to communicate with other whales that are thousands of miles away. They can't do it with all these ships going around making all this noise. But there's less noise and there's less pollution. Oh, yes. You could have to imagine, consider this world. Everybody, pretty much everybody, I mean, sure, there are the human beings, but pretty much everybody except for the human beings are just rejoicing right now. I feel like this is fantastic. This is so good that those people are staying inside finally and stopping engaging in their crazy economy. Nature feels so happy because human beings have really set ourselves a certain task, haven't we? It's been fix nature. That's been the past 10,000 years of human history. You know the problem of this world? Nature. Let's fix it. These trees, nah, we don't like them. Let's cut them up. We need to fix nature. It's not good enough. This landscape, it's not good enough. Let's fix it. We're constantly trying to fix nature. That's one way to consider what an economy is. One way to understand what an economy is an economy is the thing that people do to fix nature, to make nature into the thing they wish it were. And what is it that we want nature to be beyond everything else? We want nature to be numbers. We want nature to be converted to numbers in our bank account. Beyond everything else, that's the purpose of nature. Nowadays, in the way we see it. We want to take something that exists and is miraculous, alive, inconceivable, and turn it into something that is not at all miraculous, that is dead, that is completely conceivable, and most importantly, can be owned, is mine. Or, okay, yours, but still. Better than nothing. And so nature, for a little while anyway, is getting a respite from this assault by the human mind. And so if we identify with nature rather than with human beings, well, this is a happy period. Let's rejoice. We can dance around and celebrate. Past few months have been wonderful. And if we identify in that way, then we can also see that good news, we are nature. We're already nature. Our bodies, our minds are already nature. The sense that we're human beings is delusional. We are nature. It's not... I get frustrated when I say this because it's so obvious. It's not like nature stops at the surface of your skin and some other thing that's not nature starts. And beyond that, it's not that nature stops at the surface of your mind and then something that isn't nature starts. We are nature. Our bodies are filled up with countless microorganisms. We have bacteria. We have lots of viruses in us right now. That's not the enemy. That is us. Right inside of this body. Those beings help us, make us healthy. If you get rid of all that, you're unhealthy. And in fact, if you get rid of it too much, you die. Many microorganisms all over your skin. Your skin's covered in bacteria and in viruses and all kinds of creatures. In your skin, under your skin, in your digestive tract, in your nose, your eyes, your ears, your mouth is filled up with all these microorganisms milling around, cooperating with you, and not just cooperating with you, but actually being you, and you're being them, because all of us are nature. And in the same way that this human mind, this unskillful human mind, has made an assault on the nature outside of our bodies, it's now making an assault on the nature inside of our bodies. But it's so wonderful when we, whoever that is, who isn't nature, when we, this illusion, this delusion, called that which isn't nature, lets go and stops disturbing nature, stops disturbing ourselves. And we do this in meditation. So everybody's doing social isolation and trapping themselves in little apartments. Well, good news. People have been skillfully doing this for a long time. It's called meditation. That's what we can do now. We can meditate. And to meditate means that you stop disturbing nature. You stop disturbing the universe. And you realize there was nothing to protect. It was just patterns that acquire power, that cause self-replication of patterns. But this isn't reality. It's an illusion. And then we can directly experience the life energy that, yes, is moving through our bodies, but is also moving through the entire earth, the entire universe. It didn't start with our birth and doesn't end with our death. And we experience a happiness where we can't even say, I am happy. We just experience a happiness that is happiness. The trees are happy, the sky is happy, the earth is happy. The fox and the birds and the coral are all happy. And we finally experience that happiness that comes from no longer deluding ourselves into thinking that I started with the birth of this body, I end with the death of this body. I am human. I am a human being. And everything is my enemy. Everything else is my enemy because it might try to stop me from being human. But there was never a time when we were human. And yet, if we take this path and we meditate, and we set aside this identity, we stop disturbing nature and we let it flow. We stop bringing forth this conflict in order to maintain self-replication, in order to acquire the ability to survive. If we give up the sense that there is something that survives, if we actually do this meditation, having faced death, having put ourselves into a place where we can learn meditation, where we can move forward in harmony, in a culture of cooperation that isn't based on views, based on fear. If we've done that, then we awaken. We experience enlightenment. And in this way, our perspective expands even beyond nature. Even beyond nature. And this is peace. This true peace. Of moving from the difficulty of being involved in needing to take care of ourselves. That, of course, is very difficult. The loneliness involved. The inability to face death. We use the ability to face death to move beyond that kind of stress. And we see how important it is that we join a community that isn't based on views, based on fear. And so we overcome this sense that the only way to solve any problem is through controlling people and disempowering people because people just aren't trustworthy. We realize that it is possible to become trustworthy, and how through liberation, not through control. Incredible. And with this celebration, we work together. Through working together, we go beyond the sense that we're even human, much less myself. And we experience a happiness beyond the human, beyond the human emotion of happiness. And we follow that kind of happiness out until we experience the true peace of awakening. And from there, we can look back. We can look back on the world. And we realize, yes, at a time of crisis like this, many people will be caught up in it and will get even more trapped in the patterns that cause suffering. But some will realize the importance of the cultivation of mind. Some will realize that the basic problem here is not a virus. The basic problem is our own minds. And the basic solution isn't a virus. The basic solution is our own minds. This is extremely difficult to see, and many people won't be able to see it. But in a crisis like this, at a time when people are finally realizing that things aren't so good, the things we've been trusting aren't working, at a time in which we're suffering and we're lonely and we're scared, some people will be able to finally see what has been obvious the whole time, but has been impossible for us to see because we weren't willing to. And that is the importance of the cultivation, the purification, the liberation of our minds. And those people will make changes in their lives. The way they live will change. Because those people will be able to move forward without conflict. Those people will see that the goal of life, the goal of a human life, is not to fix oneself. And it's not to fix others, and it's not to fix nature. And in fact, the goal isn't to fix death. That's not the goal. Death is not the enemy. Nature is not the enemy. Others are not the enemy. Self is not the enemy. The desire to destroy oneself or others or nature or death, these are evil views, evil desires, and cause terrible problems. So what is the goal? The goal is the liberation from unskillful behavior and the realization of our true nature, the nature of nature, the wisdom that is beyond human understanding, that can't be measured, and that is filled to overflowing with love. If it hasn't been working, then we have to stop doing it. That's the realization of this time. The time when we will see that is when we have to, when we have no choice. So please take this fear, take this loneliness, take this stress, and use it to accept that what we've been doing hasn't been working. It hasn't made us safe, it hasn't made us happy, and it hasn't been based on the truth. We find our way forward. Find our way forward in community, and we find our way forward in honesty. This is the opportunity we have now. So, let this be a time of doing what must be done, of facing death, of entering community, of finding forms of collaboration, of cooperation, connection that are not based on views or fear. Setting aside the sense that we're human, and experiencing a happiness that leads us to liberation. In this way, we become liberated from these unskillful behaviors. And we directly connect with all living things. Today I walked out of the cabin and came here to guide the meditation. And it was a warm morning. The sun was out, got warm pretty early this spring. There were lots of insects buzzing around. Maybe some of you heard them. They were quite loud, actually, as you walked around on the lawn. They were buzzing. Then I would walk, and they'd get quiet. Then I'd stop, and they'd start bustling about again. So how did they know to come out this morning? How do they know that? How did they know that? How do those insects know that this was the morning? How do they know that the sun was coming out and it was getting warm and it was time to buzz around? They're bustling, buzzing, going from place to place. How do they know that? Or maybe we should ask, how did the sun know to come out this morning in order to warm up those insects? How did it know that? How did it know that they'd be coming out and they'd need it to warm them up a little bit? I know that this might seem like a completely foreign view, but where are you going to draw the line between the sun and those insects? Who knows what? This one single nature. Who tells whom what to do? Is it really the case that the flowers come out when it's spring? Mightn't it be the case that it's spring when the flowers come out? Please see this vast, universal, inconceivable wisdom of your own mind that told the insects to come out and that told the sun to come out on the same day in perfect harmony, without mistake.